Welcome to the Pause podcast, where we delve into the stories and experiences that shape individuals and, in turn, shape the world around them. In each episode, we hit the pause button to explore the unique tapestry of personal narratives, resilience, and growth. Join us as we connect the threads from the sections of our Pause newsletter to the rich stories that embody the essence of our community. Discover the extraordinary stories of everyday people, thought leaders, and change makers, all contributing to the evolving narrative of inclusive leadership and personal transformation. Hello, my beautiful ones. Here we are again for Pause. And Kimberley, thank you so much for agreeing to spend this time with us.
We have Kimberley Levasseur Puhach with us today. Major blessing. If you guys don't know about her already, she goes without saying. She is doing major things in her community, in our community, and has been just a powerful representative of women in our industry. And so we're interviewing her on her history, her background, and how it relates to pause in the sense of empowering one another and really diving into the different complexities in our narratives as women. And so just going off of that, let's talk a little bit about, let's just dive right in. Tell everyone a bit about yourself and kind of your background.
Well, much like many other career pathways and just even personal pathways, mine has gotten to a place where I didn't imagine that it may. I've heard so many women, Phyllis, yourself included, talk about how you start in one way, which for me was in the retail sector, in the beauty sector. I worked for many, many years. The first 15 years of my career was spent in the beauty industry, both in the retail side, and then I was an account executive for a major beauty brand for 14 years before I had a life-altering experience that had me pivot into a world that emerged that I didn't imagine would be my world, and that was HR. And I think that was a progression that was just based on an interest in people and an interest in supporting and an interest in making a difference. And that career journey began much more at a strategic level than it evolved into. And I worked with industries, organizations, and community to bridge people, basically connect the supply, which was Indigenous community, to the demand, which was sectors that were looking to employ skilled individuals. And so that shaped my path to where I am now, with lots of jigs and jogs along the way in nonprofits, in government, in private sector, to really then go into a pathway of human resource management, where I lead a group here at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights that is the full end-to-end spectrum of HR. It's equity and learning. It's building internal culture, transforming culture. And I have an area that's also focused on policy, planning, legal evaluation, and the division is really doing exciting things here. As you probably know, I was born in Winnipeg, but my family moved to a small town in southern Manitoba, Morris, Manitoba, where I grew up, and I spent until I was 15 there. My community that my family came from is the Sandy Bay Anishinaabe Nation on the west shore of Lake Manitoba. And so I spent a lot of time toing and froing, considered both places home, and then moved to Winnipeg as a teenager and started a life living in an urban setting and still visiting my home community in between when I could. And through that time, I have a lovely family. I've been married now for 26 years, 2 children, 24 and 22, Sydney and Logan, who are doing wonderful things. So you always hope that what you've planted and seeds sprout in your children. And so that's a little bit about me.
That's an amazing story. There's so many points I want to tease off of. Just that last piece about our bloodlines, our children. And it's every parent's
dream, hope that those seeds that we've planted, they will bear fruit of some sort, right? Especially if you're a younger parent, and you don't have a community around you to help you do the seed planting and the nurturing, right? It's kind of trial by fire, I guess is the term. And sometimes it turns out great, and sometimes, we take what we get and celebrate it. And so, having heard you say that, it's something that I'd love for you to share with us and our community, and that is community. So, community is one of our key core values at Ultimate Potentials, and this work that Aymar and I are doing, and how we operate is we work with folks and we build a community. So it's just not a one and done. We are really interested in being community because it's what we know. Our African descent or heritage is built around community. So it's just in our DNA. So tell me a bit about your own community growing up in a small town, Morris. What, if any, role did your community play in you either leaving Morris or being in Morris and deciding, hey, I'm going to go down this path?
Well, I think that, first of all, there's such parallels, as we know, between our communities, between any Indigenous community. The worldview is so similar.
Mhm.
And so when I think back about my time as a young person in Morris, I think that it's a story that is both, obviously there's positive things about growing up in a small town, but then there were also things that weren't positive. There was racism, and it was overt racism. And there weren't many families like my family, and there were certainly not many folks that were representative of racialized or ethnic communities. It was a very white dominant community and very religious. It's in the heart of the Bible Belt for those of you that kind of know Southern Manitoba. So the beauty of being a child is that children are adaptable and they're non-judgmental, and only when I look back in hindsight am I able to connect all the things that I'm able to connect to now, both positively and negatively. Outside of those instances of overt racism, which I was and my family was subject to, that was on a frequent basis. But you look at me, and I also have a face of white privilege because I can pass. So in many instances, my mom included, we are white passing. And so unless people knew us and knew the kind of life that we were living, the judgment level changed. So that was always interesting as well. So then, thinking about community in the sense of a small town community, I don't relate to that community in the same way that I relate to my community back in Sandy Bay and my family there. That's where I felt really connected. And even though I was still a little bit of an outsider because I grew up off my reserve, my community, I still had kinship, still was welcomed, but yet maybe cautiously by some, not all, not my immediate family. But what I appreciated about being there was that it was connection to land. Like we were always outside. We were experimenting and exploring, and our food was different there. The way we just lived when I visited there was very different than my life in Morris. So that's then when you look back, you start seeing all the things that shape and all the things that bring you to where you are today. And then if I think about fast forwarding to when I learned about my family and my mom in particular. So she is an Indian residential school survivor. She attended the Sandy Bay Indian residential school from the age of 6 years old through to 15. And that, as we all know, the history and the stories had an impact on her and vicariously to me. And my commitment, my responsibility, having heard that, and it was late in my life, it was 2007, ahead of the apology nationally, when survivors led by Phil Fontaine
I
started
remember that.
stories, and consequently so did my mom, and things were then making so much sense, and I cycled through all these emotions of anger and frustration and wanting to really understand who I was in a more deeply rich way. And so that began my journey of cultural reclamation and identity seeking work, and also committing to work in community to make a difference that I knew I needed to and I could, because of who I am and my roles and my experience, that I could really serve as that bridge to both communities.
I appreciate you giving us that insight into your childhood and some of those stories and experiences that have shaped your lives. I tell you, Kimberley, it's something about Indigenous peoples of the world, because you mentioned when you're at Sandy Bay, with the family, the food was different. You stayed outside. I'm sure from the time you had breakfast, you probably were kind of outdoors playing, right? Until you get the call to come indoors, because that's how I grew up. So I want to bring you in on this, Ayamara, and tell us a little bit about how you grew up, and where were you born? Was it here? I know it's not your interview, but this is how we do pause. So it just,
Yeah. I grew up kind of similarly. It's funny because I was born here. Both of my parents immigrated here, one from Africa and one from Latin America. But I was raised predominantly by my grandfather, who came here very, very late in his life. And so he raised me to be fairly, like he raised me with an immigrant mindset, in the sense that I was always outside. I was always in my community and his community. I was always just like a free range in a free range environment. So I can relate. It's funny because I have siblings. We're 11 and 7 years apart, and they have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk to them about my childhood experiences. So it we do relate, and when it comes to that aspect. Yeah.
Yeah, literally the world was our playing field. We just that's how we operated, and it's still my nature. I walk every day. I have to go out and touch the earth every day. I don't care what the temperature is, what's going on. So yeah.
I mean, there was just such a sense of adventure. And when I think about how we've raised our kids, definitely helicopters, try not to be bulldozers, was not my lived experience at all. I mean, we did all kinds of things that I think back on and wonder how we were allowed to do it, and that we didn't get really hurt by doing all the things that we were doing. And then also the juxtaposition in what didn't seem like a big deal as a kid at all, in my life in Morris, which really, if I think about it today and I drive past the little house that we lived in, we lived in poverty. But in comparison to how my family lived in Sandy Bay, we were wealthy and we had things. So back home in Sandy Bay, we didn't have running water. You used an outhouse, you heated water to wash. We would share a bathtub, a cast iron bathtub with a heater in it, and we would bathe, like the kids, the cousins, all in the same water. Yes, we'd go to the lake, take some soap and shampoo to clean up, and we were happy as be.
It's incredible. And that's the groundingness. And I think what we were getting at when we wanted to hear a little bit about your background in Moors as well as Sandy Bay, it's just really how those two worlds came together. As you said, they're juxtaposed, in a sense that they shape you, and sort of just looking at it from cultural identity and resilience perspective, because there's very little, if anything, that will come my way. It doesn't mean I won't feel broken in the moment and I'll experience the emotions and go through them. I know that I will stand up again and I will move forward again. And I don't know if that's a sense that you bring with you just based on your own upbringing and experiences as an Anishinaabe woman in a white European dominated world.
Yeah, I think that you learn how to literally survive and you learn to develop those skills that not only help you cope, but literally help you move forward and navigate in both worlds. In my case, it was really the idea of code shifting, where you are was one way in my community. My accent changed over the course of time because there's a vernacular that I'm not a fluent speaker. All my family is, including my mom, but there's just a way in which then your English changes to suit the way in which we talk in community. And I still do that now. And when I'm in my non-Indigenous life, that definitely changes as well. And so I think the part that I'm still working on as I decolonize myself, which is a process, as we know, is being your whole self, whatever that is to you, without needing to do those code switching exercises.
I really just want to applaud you for raising that, because it's a reality that we all face. So I do not sound like this when I'm speaking with my mom and some of my older relatives and so on. So I speak our local patois because, again, it's a respect for my family, respect for my history, and so on and so forth. And so we do call it code shifting, code switching, which it really is. So that's a work in progress for me as well, Kimberley. And during my workshops now, when I'm typically the only person who looks like me in most of my workshops. Though lately I noticed that there's been quite a few others from organizations who do look like me, as well as white Europeans and Asians and such. Has become a lot more diverse. But I say to them, this accent that you're hearing is my beautiful, lovely Jamaican accent mixed in with the Canadian accent, right? After being here for 40 odd years. It kind of morphs into that. So, so much to unpack. I'm going to turn it over to Ayamara, and I think we have some interesting, we're curious about names and meanings and all that.
I was going to dive into that when we were talking about your identity and your purpose and just decolonizing yourself as you go. You're kind of establishing your identity along the way. But I read that your given name is...
Maybe Kimberley can pronounce it for us.
Oh, maybe, yeah, you can go ahead.
So my spirit name, my traditional Anishinaabe name is Bejik Pines Ikwe. What that means is lone Thunderbird woman. And in my culture, we are born with our identity. We're already born with gifts, but we don't know what that is unless we are given that identity through ceremony, through conversations with elders. There's many different ways in which naming occurs. And so when I was in my teens, I offered my tobacco to an elder in my community to understand what my purpose, it's really connected to purpose and identity, what my name was. And so he did a ceremony, and the outcome was my name, Lone Thunderbird Woman. And so that name, in addition to systems around kinship, which for us are clans, really historically have shaped who and what it is that we bring in terms of gifts to community and what our purpose and our responsibility is. And so as part of reclaiming culture, many of us as Indigenous peoples have names, and we honor and respect the responsibility of those names. So I'm Eagle Clan, and eagles in my culture, as part of the 7 sacred laws, 7 sacred teachings are also known as, represent love. And they also are a winged creature that fly very high. And so there's senses of seeing big picture, having that sense of ability to soar and just see. And so that in combination with Thunderbird teachings, which are a creature that is really meant to protect against evil, against darkness, and also fly very high with and near creator. So that naming is really, it's profound in terms of what I feel that means to me. And it takes a lifetime to unpack and understand what that means. But I really do use it as a way to guide how I am and who I am and how I interact with people and what it is that gives me purpose in life, whether it's personal or professional, because right now those two worlds are really entrenched with one another, both from just how I live as an individual, what I do in my community in terms of volunteerism, and then also naturally how I contribute at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in my role.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that story. That literally impacted my heart as you were saying it. It's
Thank
so
you.
profound, and I think it goes without saying that purpose is crucial to understand as human beings. Like if you are going through life without that guiding factor, that purpose compass, it makes life that much more challenging, in my personal opinion. So the fact that you were given that experience with your elder for him to impart that knowledge to you is so special, because people spend their lifetime just looking for the purpose from who knows where, right? So that is fantastic. Thank you for sharing. And that kind of goes off, leads me into my second question then. You mentioned the significance of your calling, your purpose. Part of the Eagle Clan is you fly very high and you kind of see things high level. And that means you have people under your wings that you are also guiding and you're also managing and overseeing at all times. And so I wanted to ask, when you're navigating and serving as a bridge between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, if you can share the kind of strategies that you use to foster collaboration between both diverse groups and what that looks like in your day-to-day role.
You know, I think that's one thing that when I think about the color of my skin, the fact that I'm white passing, and the fact that I've had lived experiences within a community lens as well as within a non-Indigenous life, a Western framework, it's been that gift that's helped me to navigate, well, personally and professionally. So when I think about bridge building, and I think then to tie it back to responsibilities around naming and my kinship, my clan, I really do try to see things in a non-judgmental way, trying to seek to understand another, it could be divergent perspective without judging it immediately. So if I think about it in terms of bridging communities, you seek to understand what it is that and I hate to use the word side, but what one party is thinking and feeling and fearful of. Like if you can get to that state where someone can be very vulnerable with you because they trust that what they're going to share with you is for a purpose that serves them too. And in either side and in working with either party, then it's like you can get to the heart of really what is either a obstacle, which usually there are obstacles, misunderstandings. It's really about serving in that place of, sometimes it's as simply as interpreting what folks mean or say, and then finding a way to help bridge the solution as well. So I say it in a very humble way, because there's many people that do this type of bridging work. And I say it in a way that also needs to acknowledge that in spite of all the intention in what that bridging work is doing, it's not always easy and it's not always successful. And even if it's successful, oftentimes it's not sustainable. So you have to kind of see that it's it's an ongoing process, and I think it will forever be in whatever situation that someone sees their role as a bridge in.
And just hearing what you just shared, I can see how your name and the personality and the purpose, the sense of identity that you spoke about during the naming process, right? We're born with that spirit, that purpose within us. And we do need, again, community, elders within the community to help us learn and understand who we are when we show up on this earth, and then how best to go about fulfilling that purpose and that identity. And I can clearly see how those teachings and learnings are wrapped into your leadership and your community engagement. And it's, for me, that's critical. And it's something I know for myself, it's a long journey of learning to stand in my true self, like the real Phyllis, and it requires a lot of getting to know me. It's why we do pause. So it's, almost 20 years ago when I started pausing, literally, I'd take a day and just stop, and I went inward, inside, because I figured the answers are always within. And if I can get comfortable with the silence and comfortable with some of the thoughts, because we're humans, we may be critical of ourselves and not as compassionate as we need to be with ourselves. So that's what we talk about pause and pause. And it sounds as if that's something that you and your community have been doing and continue to do. And I'm seeing that is showing up in how you lead and as well as your community engagement. So I just want to maybe just ask this kind of final question around advocacy, Indigenous advocacy, and whether you could share with us sort of this coming full circle, right? Because we started out when you were a little kid growing up in Morris and going to Sandy Bay, and here you are now at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in a senior leadership role, managing teams and bridging the gaps between teams and the community and so on and so forth. So can you speak to some of the key challenges and opportunities that you've encountered in this realm? Because you almost said it. The intent is there, right? Operating on spirit and guidance and purpose, but it doesn't mean it always works. And sometimes, you have to step back. So what are some of those key challenges that you've experienced?
I think that there's a difference between the idea of benevolence. You want to be a kind person, and maybe rhetoric, things that are said, whether it's something that is made in a commitment in writing, and then just the difference between that and how that is acted upon, how it's actually and literally applied. So in my experience, leading from when I really started down the strategic HR career pathway, because it was very much involving community and this hard work, to today, the struggle is real at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights as well. We're not perfect. It really is getting beyond what is our own self-interest and whatever fear it is that we need to face in what we might perceive that we need to give up in order to move forward collectively, I'll say. It's the idea that most people, I believe, are kind-hearted people, or they feel something when there are wrongs in the world. There's so many that we could cite that are unfolding right in front of our eyes. But where it stops is this idea, if it doesn't affect me, then it's a really sad thing. And I might even say I support X, Y, and Z, but there's often not a lot of momentum beyond that. You think about commitments that individuals or organizations make around truth and reconciliation and the calls to action, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and two-spirited people. Everything that's unfolding now from a human rights lens, lots of people will talk about how much it matters to them or how bothered they are by it. But the challenge is getting people to act on it. And so it's really, I think the obstacle is that stands in the way is creating that deep sense of empathy that compels people to do something, even if it doesn't affect them directly. That's, I think, the number one challenge. It always comes kind of back to that self-interest and often ignorance. And I know that there's a spectrum. We all experience the spectrum of racism. So I'm not talking about the overt racist people. I mean, I don't think that we'll expect to have a huge impact with those kind of folks. But I'm talking about those that might be more apathetic, but want to do something or say they want to do something, or those that are really empathetic, but they're still bystanders. They're not quite moved to action yet. So that's the challenge, is to really help activate people individually at a community level. And then when we think about what, and this is going to sound altruistic, it's my Pollyanna lenses, pink rosy ones, that if we could get people, the vast majority of people, to that place of understanding and collective action, I think that we live in a much different city, province, country, world, really.
We couldn't ask for a better response if we want to qualify it. No,
Yeah.
it's a real response. And those are some of the real challenges as someone who does this work, working with organizations, because I feel they are a microcosm of the real world. And as employees, we enter into workplaces at the best times in our lives. We're at our youngest or fittest or strongest or healthiest and most hopeful. Most of us, right? When we enter IMR, what are your thoughts on that? You're going in and it's like, I make a change here. I can make a change.
Yeah, that's me currently. It's my current season.
There you go, right? And so things do happen when you come upon some of those barriers, and in particular, the bystanders. Bystanders just don't understand their roles, and it's why I really love what you're doing at the CMHR. I really appreciate the opportunities that so many other folks in this space, in this realm, doing advocacy work, social change work. We have a role to play, and that role is to really help bystanders realize the power they hold. We can call them allies, but a bystander sees, a bystander hears, and they also experience, because you cannot have something happen to another human and not have an impact on you in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
I'm analyzing myself and I'm like, am I a bystander? Because I'm a very empathetic person and I care a lot about my people. I wouldn't consider myself someone who is self-interested. I always care for others when I can. I, of course, don't try to wear myself thin because then I'm pouring from an empty cup. My emphasis, at least in this season, has been to focus on filling myself up that way that I can pour into others. But in the same token, what are ways, because you're saying that there are challenges in terms of getting people to act. How do I act, for example, as a bystander? Now that I'm analyzing myself, how would I act and how would I take action in a way that, in a meaningful way?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I think that the answer to that, it depends. And I think it's really about what it is that you're able to do. So, when I think about activism, it could be as simple as calling someone out or calling someone in. That's action, right? That's not bystanding. It could be supporting organizations monetarily, like giving some money to whatever organization that you feel connected and aligned to. It could be writing letters to governments when something is really bothering you and you need to You need to show your political leader that we live in a democratic society and you're going to voice. It
Mhm.
could be attending protests and rallies. There's just so many ways in which we can be active, either individually or collectively. There's
Yeah.
no one right answer, but
I agree.
I think that your question is such an important one, because I think that question is one that is on many people's minds, and
Mhm.
that it's one of those things that I also believe folks are afraid to ask because there is that sense of I'm not doing enough, and I'm quite sure you're doing things that you don't even know that you're doing that are active in nature.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends. As you said, it depends. I just would like to add one thing to what you said there, Kimberly. So yes, yes, yes to all of them. And another form of being active in helping to, I would say, create social change is learning about our histories. Would you all not agree with that?
yes,
Because
Yeah,
if we
absolutely.
don't know our histories and we only know the European told version of our histories, then what we do is repeat the same indignities that were meted out on our ancestors. And so it's one of the things or ways when I am working with folks that I invite them. Sometimes you don't make any external changes yet. Remember, I'm a big fan of pause. I always start within. So I invite them, how much do you know about your history in this world? It doesn't matter if you're of European descent, African descent, Caribbean, Spanish, Asian, it doesn't matter, Indigenous. How much do you know about your history? And what is that source? And is there another source that you could start learning about your place in this world and how you're seeing, experience, and are able to navigate this world? So it all depends on where you're at. But I always say, we got to know who we are. That identity and that purpose is so critical.
for sure. And really appreciate the idea of learning, because many folks don't even know what it is that is at the basis of what they might see as a symptom, whether it's war, whether it's poverty, whether it's mental health and substance abuse. We need to seek to understand why that's happening, as opposed to assuming that we might know.
Well
Yeah.
said, well said. So we've come to the section where Ayamara is going to take you down a road. And she's
Okay.
going to ask you a bunch of quick questions, one after the other. And and it's just another way of getting us and our community to know a little bit more about you. So why don't you take it away, Ayamara?
So I actually had some pre-written, but I'm kind of gonna dash those because I've learned some stuff along the way. So I'm gonna go and align them with what I've learned so far. So you said that you came from, the makeup beauty industry. These are rapid fire questions, by the way. So the first answer that comes to your mind, you just want to spit it out.
Yeah.
No thinking.
What is your favorite makeup look?
Probably what you're seeing now. So I like a dramatic makeup look, and whether it's daytime or nighttime, this is how I show up. My daytime, my nighttime, and vice versa. That's not hard at all.
I love it. No, these aren't meant to be hard. They're just meant to pick your brain.
Yeah.
Okay. What's your favorite go-to comfort food?
Pizza. Yeah, probably something that has chicken and olives and hot peppers.
That's good. Okay. This is Phyllis's favorite question. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Oh, yes. I love that question too. I would like to have dinner with one of the, I'll say my ancestors, but some figurehead like Big Bear, Chief Big Bear, that were really quintessentially involved in the time where we were being colonized as a country and as a peoples, and we're starting down that road of treaty signings. I'd really like to sit and learn and listen from those teachings.
With a notepad and a pen, just
Yes.
Maybe just a
And a
recording.
translator.
a recording.
Translator, yes. but something to record it because there'll be so much wisdom
Yes.
coming through. We can't write that down fast enough.
No,
Mm.
right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
All right. What's your favorite hobby or pastime?
I really like being outside. So anything outdoors, whether it's walking, hiking, I kayak, just connecting outside is just, it's my joy for sure.
Mm. All three of us have that in common. So that says
Love it.
something.
Mhm.
And last one, this is actually a powerful one as well. So what's one book that has had a profound impact on you till this day?
Oh, wow. Do I just pick one? There's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's a book that was written by an Anishinaabe woman, and it's a beautiful read for anyone, whether you're Indigenous or not, because it threads in an incredible, rich cultural story from her perspective as an academic in the United States and her journey in reclaiming culture and her storytelling through her connection to the land. And I'm not
Mm.
doing it any justice by giving you that excerpt. It's a good thing I'm not one of those writers that give you the little sizzle about a book because you may not read it based on what I just said.
We're feeling the impact it's had on you, and I think that's a much bigger testament to the power of that book.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
a
Yeah. Good point.
beautiful book and it had a huge impact. And yeah, I always leave it on my night table because it's one of those that you put sticky notes on and you highlight and you want to
Dog-eared,
read over.
highlight.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing. That
Wow,
wraps up my rapid fire questions.
beautiful. So
That's okay.
Kimberly, in the spirit of International Women's Day, we're going to invite you to choose one of the following two parting questions. Would you like to spotlight your thoughts on change? So what's something that you're working on in your community, just to give our listeners an idea as to how we can get involved? Or would you like to exchange a story? You can share a brief personal story, whether it's about yourself, your community, that's touched you deeply, something that could inspire our community.
Yeah, I think I'll go with the second option, which is really talking about personal experience that really led me more deeply into the work that I do as a volunteer. So at any given time, I sit on numerous boards, and they're all volunteer boards, and they all have a connection back to Indigenous people in some way, shape, or form. But how I started in that community work was through an organization called Gani Ganijik, and it's a human services organization in the inner city. Right now, the main location is on McDermott Avenue. And the story of how I came to that organization was in and around the time that I was pivoting out of one career in the beauty industry and not really knowing where I was going. I had a terrible accident. It was life-threatening, life-altering. It literally changed my life. And so I was seeking a new path. And also in that time, 2007, learning more about my mom and my relative stories around the Indian residential school. So I happened to go to a press conference because I was rehabbing during that time from my accident. And it was at that organization. And I wept the entire time that I listened to the elder talking about, well, her lived experience and really compelling people to make a difference, get involved, believe the stories that were being told. So that led me to that organization. And there's so many other elements of why I was meant to go to that organization and just connect. As it turned out, one of my family members, my cousin, was connected to the executive director there, whom is a mentor, a teacher. I consider her like a mother figure, just an incredible woman, Leslie Spillett,
I
who was
know Leslie.
also one of the founders.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So I started engaging with that organization just on a very personal level. I was so profoundly impacted by what I had experienced being in that space. I felt immediately connected and at home, smelling the smudge, hearing children and families, like I'm getting goosebumps talking about it right now. So that led me then eventually to be invited to sit on the board of directors. We would refer to it as a council. And I stayed there for many, many years. I was a co-chair as I left. And now my daughter sits on that board, and she is the co-chair of that organization because it had an impact on us as a family, that organization, and all the good work that they do. So they do work to support women, families, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, advocacy, harm reduction strategies, employment, children in care. Like the gamut is massive. The work is so important, and that organization is very near and dear to me to this day. So I just always am so proud of what they do and feel forever connected and grateful to them.
That is grounding. That's a powerful story. And I know it's one that, for me personally, just hearing it, it just reinforces the importance of community and the importance of, you know, having that space, because Canada is such a diverse country. We can get ourselves lost if we just think, okay, it's just Canada. But it's critical that we ground ourselves in the different communities that go to make up this land called Canada. And that's what I'm picking up from this. And it's really reinforcing my own commitment. That's like my takeaway that I'm seeing here, you know, with the work that I too am doing in my own community. So thank you for that story exchange. I really hope and intend that those members of our community who hear it, it might spark in them, whether they're already doing work that, hey, here's a little bit more energy to boost for you to keep doing. And that if you were thinking about doing, maybe now is the time to take that step forward.
This episode is going to be posted on International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day. Thank you for being such an amazing, impactful, empowering woman doing the work that you do. You are an inspiration to someone like myself. I'm 25 years old and I'm looking at you and having this conversation like, how did I get into this Zoom call? But yeah, thank you so much for the work that you do.
I'm so honored to have been part of the discussion and to be part of Pause. And in the spirit of International Women's Day, it's really honoring all the matriarchs. When I think about why we're here, look at the women, the mothers, the grandmothers, the aunties that have surrounded us and continue to surround us, whether they're living or they're in a spirit place now. So
thank you, Kimberly. I really appreciate you taking your time and coming to share with us just your journey. And it's a journey that is ongoing. It doesn't stop until we move over into the spirit world. And so that's one of my things that I say to myself, as long as I'm in this world, I know I'm here for a reason. And that reason is not solely for my own being, because I can't survive without others. And so I'm just absolutely inspired by what you do and continue to do and the bridges that you're building. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.